Hey guys, welcome to video 43. We're working on two rather interesting pieces at the top of the bike today, the steering dampener and the triple tree.
Let's go ahead and jump right in. Bring up the gizmo, head to the gear and pick the polycube. Press delete loops and weld it across the x-axis. Now let's make sure symmetry is turned on in the x-axis. Unmask the polygon and move it into place. Now mask the model and bring in a cylinder 3D. We're going to delete the other half of the model. Unmask that cylinder and scale it down a bit. Let's go ahead and inset the flat island and click to repeat on the bottom. Now we can Q-mesh the polygroup island. Unmask those inner polygons and move them closer to the edge. Grab the Move Infinite Depth brush and make any adjustments you need to get the shape just right. Add a couple of edge loops and Q-mesh the flat island. Now we can press Ctrl W to group visible. Unmask the top and scale it flat. Go ahead and invert the mask and do the same on the bottom. Clear the mask and scale it along the Z-axis. Weld it in the X-axis and press QC50. Now we can throw in a couple of edge loops, crease the edge, and set the crease level to 3. Let's press Apply and delete the lower subdivisions. Set the poly count to 1,000,000 for the Dynamesh utility. Now it's time to grab the Mask Perfect Circle. Let's finish masking using the Mask Curve brush. Flip the mask, then press Ctrl W to polygroup that masked area. Unmask the polygroup and give that mask a little blur. Run a quick Polish by Features to smooth it out. Control-click on the polygroup with the gizmo to reset the mask. Then Control-move with the gizmo to extrude. Clear that mask and let's pick up the Mask Perfect Circle again. Press Ctrl W to polygroup the mask, then unmask the polygroup and blur that mask. Let's run another Polish by Features to clean it up. Once again, Control-click on the polygroup with the gizmo to reset the mask. Then Control-move with the gizmo to extrude. Clear that mask and lay down another mask with the Mask Perfect Circle. Press Ctrl W to polygroup the mask. Unmask the polygroup and blur the mask. Now we can run a Polish by Features. Control-click on the polygroup with the gizmo to reset the mask, then Control-move with the gizmo to extrude. This time, let's use the Clip Curve brush to clean up the back. Let's mask the model and bring up the gizmo. From the gear, select the cylinder 3D. let's scale and position it into place. Unmask the polygons and extrude them with the gizmo. Let's scale them flat and extrude them a few more times with the gizmo. Grab the Move Infinite Depth brush to adjust the shape. Go ahead and mask the model, bring up the gizmo again, and from the gear, select Cylinder 3D. Adjust the scale and position. Then run a Dynamesh and polish. Let's smooth out any imperfections. Then use the Clip Curve brush to correct the curvature. Let's grab the Smooth brush for some final cleanup. Isolate the blue polygroup and grab the Mask Curve brush. Then press Ctrl W to create a polygroup from the mask. Bring everything back to view, and then isolate the blue polygroup again. Use the mask curve to make another mask, then press Ctrl W to polygroup that mask. Isolate the polygroup again and group the mask. Let's polygroup our mask one more time for good measure. So we have a few extra polygroups. Pick out the blue polygroup and click on Auto Groups. Isolate these polygroups and press Ctrl W to group visible. Go ahead and select all the polygroups. I'll leave one group masked so you can see how important Polish by Features really is. Clear the mask. Isolate these polygroups to mask, then bring everything back and invert the mask. Hold Ctrl and move with the gizmo to extrude. Notice how the polygroup with a Polish by Feature leads to a clean extrusion, while the other polygroup is a bit of a mess. For the interior of this piece, we'll model that when it's time to retopo. These polygroups will serve as a helpful guide when laying down the topology. Mask the model and turn on symmetry in the X-axis. Bring up the gizmo and select Polycube from the gear. Delete the edge loops. Then turn on local symmetry with dynamic switched off. Now we can scale and position the cube into place. Isolate the cube and press Group as Dynamesh Sub. Then we can Dynamesh and run a polish. Mask the model and turn on symmetry in the x-axis. Bring up the gizmo and choose Cylinder 3D from the gear. Let's scale and move it into place. Let's isolate the cylinder and press Group as Dynamesh Sub. Now we can Dynamesh it and give it a good polish. Let's fire up the gizmo and choose Cylinder 3D from the gear. Set the H divides to 16 and press QC50. Go ahead and scale it a bit on the Z axis. Hold Control and move with the gizmo to duplicate. Let's scale it down and clear the mask. Now we can Q-mesh the polys down. Press QC50. Unmask the top cylinder and move it down. Unmask those two edges and collapse both sides. Time to add an edge loop right down the middle. Then choose Transpose Edge Loop Complete. Clear the mask and press QC50. Then increase the middle edge loop. Now, Alt tag the bottom 4 polygons to transpose. Control and move with the gizmo to extrude. Next, we want to scale them along the Y-axis. Press Ctrl and W to group visible, then choose Inset Polyloop. We can click to repeat for the back. Then we can choose Q-Mesh Polygroup Island. Now let's press QC50. Mask the model, bring up the gizmo, and from the gear, select Cylinder 3D. Let's rotate it 90 degrees. Set the H divides to 8 and scale it down. From the ZBrush, choose Inset Flat Island. Then we can Q-mesh the Polygroup Island. Unmask the cylinder and clip the top faces. Go ahead and add 3 edge loops on the outside and inside. Unmask the cylinder and move it closer. Add in an edge loop in the middle. Turn on symmetry in the Z-axis and insert 2 edge loops. Now we can delete those polygons. Unmask the cylinder and move it closer. Go ahead and press weld points and turn on dynamic to see which points didn't get welded. Now we can increase the weld distance until the points get welded. Add in a few edge loops with insert multiple edge loops. Uncrease some of the edges and set the crease level to 3. Now we can press Ctrl W to group visible. Turn on symmetry, then unmask the edge loop. Now we can bring up the gizmo and move them out. Go ahead and duplicate the subtool. Press apply and set the subdivision level to 2. Delete the lower and higher subdivisions. Select those 2 poly loops and delete hidden. Turn off smooth and up the subdivision level by 1. Now we can delete the lower subdivisions. Go ahead and delete those 3 edge loops. Let's run a polish by features. Then we can select Polygroup Flat Island. Set the adaptive size to 0 and turn double on. Let's turn on Keep Groups and set the slider to 0 for the ZRemesher. This way we get evenly spaced polys. Now we can delete the edge loops. Subdivide once and delete the lower subdivisions. Let's run a polish by features and delete the middle edge loop. Press Ctrl W to group visible. Let's Q-mesh all those polygons outwards. Let's choose Polygroup for the polygon action, Polyloop and Checker for the target. Now we can slide the edges a bit. From the ZBrush, choose Inset Polygroup All. We can tap Alt to change the polygroup color. Choose Transpose Polygroup All and scale it along the Z-axis. Now go ahead and Q-mesh Polygroup All. Again, we'll want to transpose Polygroup All and scale it along the Z-axis. Then we can Q-mesh the polyloop on both sides. Let's scale everything in the Z-axis. Now we can choose Slide Edge Loop Complete. Press Ctrl W to group visible. Then add in edge loops to quad it up. And finally uncrease them.